didn't make a man to be a woman. He made the man to be a man. He didn't make the woman to be a man. He made the woman to be a woman. And this is the truth. What are you going to do? Come attack me now?
I should.
Hey, man, it's up to you. If you want to pull that on me, well, God bless you. So you just threatened me with a gun. You just pulled a gun on my face. Man, Lord have mercy on you.
Well, apparently the horseshoe theory of politics is correct, and the far left will come around to the far right eventually. And in this article from Eugene Weekly, the radicals on the left have decided to celebrate the Second Amendment. But of course, they're doing so for completely fictitious reasons, which is also why men dress up as women. But we'll talk about their fiery but mostly peaceful protest and why they are taking up arms. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe today on the show. I'm going to try to give you Christian commentary on cultural events because we're living in an age of bad ideas, and the only cure for bad ideas are good ideas. Now, today's show is sponsored by our friends over at Sweet and Savory Classroom. Now, I want to read the article from Eugene Weekly, but it should be noted just real quick, if you don't know, that Eugene is in Oregon. And Oregon is quickly becoming a cesspool that nobody would ever want to live in, and Eugene is no exception. And on this cover of Eugene Weekly, we have a trans activist holding a gun like only a person who's never held a gun would. And it says that as the Trump administration attacks trans people, some queer folks are armed and ready to bash back. So let's get into the article and see what it has to say. Why do you own a gun? My answer to that frequent question is always this: because I feel I have to. Well, that's not my answer. I own it for the sake of protecting my family. I own it for the sake of potentially hunting, but I don't own it because of a feeling. Now, it's very fitting for trans activists to own a gun because of a feeling, because they argue that they are women because of a feeling. But maybe your feelings are the problem at the end of the day, as we'll see as this article continues. Being a transgender woman today can be scary, especially with the current presidential administration and its crackdown on transgender rights. I pray that I'll never have to use my weapon in self-defense, but I'm prepared to do so to save my life or the life of someone else. Well, what a hero. Because this administration has basically said, no, we're not going to honor your pronouns. No, you cannot use the women's bathroom if you're a dude. Go find a urinal. And no, you cannot compete in women's sports if you're a dude. Now, so this individual is taking up arms because of these threats against his supposed humanity. Now, according to the FBI, 2,936 hate crimes took place against the LGBTQ plus people in 2023. That's a 135% increase in incidents compared to the early Trump era in 2017. Donald Trump's 2024 election campaign rested heavily on anti-trans sentiment, with Trump's campaign spending $21 million on anti-trans messaging by October 2024. Now, I don't know if those numbers are correct in terms of the financial element of what Trump did, but Trump just simply said, hey, you can't compete in women's sports. That's essentially what he did. And as far as the other numbers are concerned, let's assume that that's true, that the percent in increase is true, and that the amount of hate crimes is true. What I've already shown on the show in the past and want to remind you of is that when we talk about crimes against trans people, there is no category of hate crime against trans people. So it's just anything that happens to a trans person is considered a hate crime because of their supposed marginalized identity status. So if a trans person is killed, even if they're killed by another trans person, this is supposedly a hate crime. So let's just say that they're right about the numbers, but they're totally wrong about the fact that any of these things are hate crimes. The reality is trans people engage in really dangerous behaviors that are kind of counterproductive to their own well-being. And as a result of that, they find themselves in dangerous situations disproportionately more than other people do. So let's keep reading the article so that we can get a little bit more nonsense. Firearms are highly controversial topics right now, and even more so in queer left-leaning communities. But the trend of queer folks buying guns, arming themselves, and getting trained is growing. Yippee. There's a saying I hear a lot from the armed queer community, and that's you go far enough left and you get your guns back. From pistols to AR-15s and AK-47s, queers are learning to bash back, protecting themselves from surging levels of violence and political hatred. So there's two questions I have about this article, and the first one is this. Is the described fears of the trans activists in the LGBTQ community actually accurate? Well, to answer that, I think we need to look at the mental health state of those in the quote-unquote trans community. And so it will come as no surprise to you that trans people are disproportionately represented in terms of mental health crisis. A 2024 study analyzing data from 2014 to 2022 found that depression among transgender and gender diverse adults in the U.S. increased from 19% in 2014 to 51.3% in 2022, compared to a modest rise among cisgender adults. Now, it's from Fenway Health. And then we have this from the NIH. A 2019 study of 10,000 plus transgender patients reported 31% had a diagnosis of major depressive disorder compared to 13.6% of cisgender patients. Transgender youth have a 2 to 4 times higher risk of depression compared to cisgender peers. And this 2023 U.S. Transgender Population Health Survey found 44% of transgender adults report lifetime suicide attempts compared to 17% of cisgender adults, and 7% reported recent suicidal ideation versus 3% for cisgender adults. And then this is from the William Institute over at UCLA. So the numbers are already out. We know that transgender, supposed self-identified transgender people are at much higher risk of mental health crisis than anybody else in society. This is why they get so easily triggered. But of course, we would expect that from a dude who thinks he's a woman and not only dresses like one, but is willing to mutilate his own body to pursue a feeling. And what I would argue is to pursue a sense of meaning and a sense of feeling important. If you would mutilate your own body to pursue those feelings, then I can almost guarantee that you would be willing to hurt other people. So this brings us to the second question. Should transgender people be allowed to even own guns in the first place? And my quick answer to that is no.
No, 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 no. Hell no.
I am fully prepared to argue on today's show that people who have a history of mental health issues should not own guns. Now, this should be obvious, and it should be obvious that transgender people fall into this category, therefore they shouldn't own guns. But there are a lot of libertarians and even conservatives who would totally fundamentally disagree with me. And I think a good way to think about this is to think about the First Amendment and kind of put the shoe on the other foot. Do you think that trans people should have their First Amendment rights taken from them? Well, it depends on what you mean. So the right to speak freely, should it have any restrictions on it whatsoever, or should you be a free speech absolutist? My answer to that question is very simple. I think the answer is, yeah, you should have restrictions placed upon your free speech. For instance, if you're a trans activist and you become a teacher, you should not have the freedom to be able to speak to kids in your classroom about your sexual excursions and your sexual escapades or your sexual identity. I don't think Drag Queen Story Hour is suitable for the public school system, and I don't think that the transgender individual should be stocking the shelves at your local public library, sticking their books in the kids section. I think that that is counterproductive to kids. And in fact, the Constitution has kind of protected this idea. And in fact, it was just on display in a Supreme Court case that talked about the P word in Texas. Now, Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion and said that it is in the interest of the Constitution and the state and the federal government to protect children from the P word. And therefore, a law making it such that a person who goes on a P word site has to identify themselves and prove that they are 18 and above is not an undue stress on that individual's First Amendment rights. And therefore doesn't violate their First Amendment rights to engage in that kind of activity. Now, I'll be the first to argue that I don't believe the P word is a First Amendment issue. I think that's totally ridiculous. The idea that our founding fathers were putting the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights so that they could have future modern Western man engage in the P word and OnlyFans, that's absolutely ridiculous. They'd be rolling in their grave, actually, to think that they fought and bled for the idea that a sexual pervert can engage in this kind of stuff and then claim the First Amendment as his right to do so. So while they're rolling in their grave, let's go ahead and realize the fact that I think it's very obvious that there should be restrictions on our constitutional rights. Now, I fully believe that these rights are natural rights. The government didn't give them to you, and they can't take them away from you. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be restrictions placed upon natural rights that are found in the Bill of Rights. We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I want to make sure that you know that today's show is sponsored by our friends over at Sweet and Savory. Now, Sweet and Savory is the online or in-person cooking class experience that will teach you to make some of the most amazing food in a great, fun environment. Now, if you're looking for a date night, Sweet and Savory is the place to go. You're going to spend a lot of money on great food anyway. Why not get great food and a great experience and learn how to cook that stuff at home so that you can take it with you? Not to mention, they also have some great summer experiences for your kids. So if you want to get your kids preoccupied for the summer and teach them some life lessons that they cannot live without, then you need to check out their Sweet and Savory summer camps. Now, you can do that by going to sweetandsavoryclassroom.com, and you can scroll through a list of all the upcoming classes they have. And then when you check out, make sure to use the promo code IndieThinker for a discount on your order. So let me just say that if we can't place common sense restrictions that protect our constitutional rights, but also restrict others who want to abuse their constitutional privileges, then I don't know what we're doing here. We just need to close up shop and forget this whole American experiment thing, because we're done here. The idea that it's just a slippery slope, that we can't put into practice common sense gun laws such as, hey, if you're mentally ill, you probably shouldn't own a gun. You probably need a psychiatrist, but not a gun. If we can't do that because of the slippery slope of, well, today we're going to say that trans people are mentally ill, but what if they say that Christians are mentally ill? If that's true, then I just have to tell you, we don't have a constitution in the first place. There's no point in protecting our constitution if it cannot clearly state that a person practicing their religious liberty is wildly different than a man that thinks he's a woman.
I'm proud of you, you know that. I hope you do.
I think it's fair to suggest, without any kind of, I think, intellectually lazy arguments about the slippery slope, that we can put into practice common sense restrictions on our constitutional rights that keep them actually protected, that keep them from being abused by people who would mistreat and misuse them to the detriment of society. So while there's a lot of nuance involved in all of that, again, I would just argue, if we can't institute these kind of protections for these constitutional rights, then you really don't have a constitution. And what are you defending in the first place? I will just say this, that if you have to resort to slippery slope arguments, then I think you're taking an intellectual crutch rather than actually interested in protecting the Constitution. Because I think our Constitution deserves more thoughtful conversation, and it at least deserves this conversation. If you are a trans person and you are unfortunately suffering from delusion, and you have a fairy tale and are willing to grab a gun to fight for that fairy tale, as is illustrated in this article, all of the attacks on transgenderism are absolutely fictitious. If that's who you are, then you should not own a gun, for the sake of everybody involved, for the sake of our society, for the sake of our Constitution. If we don't understand that it is required of us to institute moral principles in the protection of our constitutional rights, then we're not interested not only in protecting the Second Amendment, but we're not interested in protecting our union. Because the West will totally fundamentally collapse the moment we refuse to actually use moral principles to hold our society together. Now, we still, even in our broken state, are doing that, but we need good, godly men that are willing to stand up, not just for their Second Amendment rights, but to stand up for the morality that will protect those rights on in to the future for you and your kids. All right, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if this show was beneficial to you, you'll love becoming a member over at IndieThinker.org/support, where you can gain access to exclusive perks like movies, ebooks, audiobooks, documentaries, and so much more to take your Christian worldview to the next level. Don't forget to check out our sponsors down below in the description of this podcast, but most importantly, go with God.